art of adapting Broadway musicals for the screen is one with a long and storied history. It's a tale of monumental successes, catastrophic failures, and demonic hellspawn that can bring grown men to their knees. And while there's no chance of the upcoming Dear Evan Hansen being littered with CGI furries or extreme Hugh Jackman close-ups, I do have some real concerns with the direction this adaptation seems to be taking. Why do I care? Well, for one thing, I'm a little protective. But more importantly, I see some real danger on the horizon if this thing is done wrong. And here's why.
On the outside, always looking, and will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, whacking through a window.
Okay, real talk disclaimer before I start. Dear Evan Hansen is a really intense and heavy show that covers a lot of difficult topics, so trigger warning for all of these things. There's going to be discussion of all of it, so if you are uncomfortable with that, you should probably click off now. Also, I am so sorry, I'm probably going to end up using some clips from bootlegs in here, because otherwise you're just going to be looking at a blank screen or at my face, and I don't want to subject you to either of those things. So just for the record, I took these off of YouTube. I've never filmed a bootleg, because that's not very legal, so yeah. I'm going to go through the plot of the show just so that if you don't know it, you can kind of be caught up, and that's going to take up kind of a chunk of this video, just to make sure everything makes sense. But if you already know the plot of the show or just don't want to, have to deal with the whole summary and whatever, you can skip to this timestamp. I am hopefully going to be Dear Evan Hansen opened in Broadway's Music Box Theater on December 4th, 2016, and is technically still running today, except for, the thing. The show, which took home 6 Tony Awards and spawned a national tour as well as productions in Toronto and London, follows a teenage boy named Evan. Now, Evan struggles with crippling social anxiety and, depending on who you ask, is possibly also on the autism spectrum. His therapist has given him an assignment: to write a daily affirmation letter to himself, starting, Dear Evan Hansen, today is going to be a good day, and here's why. Enter Evan's mom, a nurse's aide named Heidi, who takes night classes on top of her long shifts at work, and is therefore never home. She encourages Evan to put himself out there, suggesting he go around and ask the other kids at school to sign his cast. Oh, Evan has a broken arm, by the way. That'll become important later. As she laments how difficult it is to connect to her son, we cut to the Murphys, the siblings, Connor and Zoe, and their parents, Cynthia and Larry, at the breakfast table.
Fuck you!
Fuck you! I do not need you picking at your brother right now. That is not constructive.
The two moms finish their song as their kids head off to school. We meet the overachieving Alana and Evan's family friend, Jared. We learned that Evan's arm broke when he fell out of a tree over the summer, after which he laid on the ground waiting for someone to come help him, but no one did. Jared makes a crack at Connor, Evan laughs uncomfortably, Connor takes it as an agreement and shoves him to the ground. Evan sings about struggling to connect with people. Oh, also Zoe checks in on him, and he proves himself to be just as confident around the people he likes as I am.
Apologize a lot.
I'm sorry. I mean, you know what I mean. That's fine.
At the end of the already pretty soul-crushing first day of school, he goes into the computer lab to finally write that letter, but this time he's honest, lamenting that it wasn't an amazing day after all, that the only thing keeping him going is Zoe, who doesn't even know him, and how he feels that no one would even notice if he disappeared. He signs it, sincerely, your best and most dearest friend, me. Connor enters, presumably to apologize for shoving him earlier, and offers to sign his cast. He makes the ironic aside that now we can both pretend that we have friends, as he scrawls his name across Evan's cast, guaranteeing that no one else can, before noticing his sister's name in the letter and jumping to the conclusion that this was all just a trick to get him to act out so Evan could go around calling him crazy. Before Evan can explain himself, he storms out of the room, letter in hand. A few days pass, and Evan is called to the principal's office, where he finds Larry and Cynthia Murphy. They tell him that Connor has taken his own life, and give him the letter which they've assumed is their son's suicide note. They see Connor's name on Evan's cast, and those combined pieces of evidence lead them to believe that the two boys were best friends. After some encouragement from Jared, he agrees to have dinner with the family, during which, out of increasing anxiety amid high tension between Zoe and her parents, he spins a story in which he and Connor were together when he broke his arm, where rather than laying on the ground alone, he had someone to help him. The story comforts Cynthia, and she obviously wants to know more. With Jared's help, Evan writes a series of fake email exchanges between Connor and himself in a song that's so fun you almost forget how fucked up it is. The emails give Cynthia a new hope that her son's life may not have been as sad as it seemed, but Larry remains stoic and detached, while Zoe laments that the Connor everyone remembers was not the one she knew. Their relationship was a negative one, he was cruel to her, and the need to very publicly pretend that she misses him more than she does is taking its toll. She admits later, though, that the mention of her name in Connor's supposed note is on her mind. With her parents' constant bickering and her father in such denial that he didn't even cry at the funeral, she's been left to ruminate on those lines herself. To comfort her, Evan says that he and Connor would talk about her all the time. He always wanted to fix their strained relationship, but never knew how to. That seems to comfort her, with a weight newly lifted off her shoulders, and then he ruins the moment by kissing Zoe. Jared hangs a lampshade on this fact, as he's done throughout the show.
I can't believe you tried to kiss Zoe Murphy on her brother's bed after he died!
And he assures Evan that it's no big deal. With all that's going on in the world, people will have forgotten about Connor in no time. Cut to a few weeks later, and everyone's forgotten about Connor. Alana tells Evan he needs to do something as his best friend, and an imaginary version of Connor appeals to Evan's own fears of being forgotten, to convince him to further the lie for the sake of preserving his memory.
No one deserves to be forgotten. No one deserves to be forgotten. No one deserves to fade away.
He proposes an idea, a movement he calls the Connor Project, and gets Alana, Jared, and the Murphys on board. What he's unprepared for is the expectation that he'll be the one to give a speech at the school-wide memorial assembly Alana sets in motion to kick off the project. The day of the assembly comes, and Evan drops his note cards in the middle of his speech, then falls to the ground, having a panic attack. The theater falls deadly silent as he sits alone on stage, trying and failing to calm himself, until finally he refocuses on Connor, calms himself, stands, and gives his own speech, using his loneliness and anxiety to share a message of hope with the audience and lament that he couldn't do the same for Connor. A video of his speech goes viral, and the world rallies around the Connor Project. The stage is overwhelmed with projections, and Larry finally breaks down, letting himself really grieve his son for the first time. Zoe, in a moment alone, thanks Evan with a kiss, and we go to intermission. The show picks up with a video announcement from Evan and Alana that the Connor Project would be raising money to reopen the apple orchard that Evan and Connor supposedly spent the day in, the story that started it all. Jared tries to write himself into the lie, but Evan, with zero sense of irony, tells him to stop making things up. He's taken aback at being brushed off, but tries not to show it. Heidi enters and tells Evan that she saw the video on Facebook and is uncomfortable with how much he's been keeping from her. The conversation is cut short, though, when he tells her he's stopped taking his anxiety medication, which she, for some reason, sees as a good thing. More on that later. Evan goes to the Murphys' house, where he bonds with Larry over a lesson in breaking in a baseball glove, and he tells him that his father left when he was 7. They express the comfort they find in each other, a father without a son and a son without a father, through baseball metaphors, of course, like men. Later, Zoe visits Evan at home, and after learning his family can't afford to pay for college, and establishing that they are, in fact, in a relationship, she asks that they just focus on each other, rather than hinging their feelings on her brother. He takes that a little too seriously, though, and completely bails on Alana, is a dick to Jared again, and walks off with Zoe. Then it's back to the Murphys, where Larry and Cynthia have invited Heidi over. They discuss their son's secret friendship until the couple walks in and Evan realizes he's fucked up. Cynthia offers up Connor's college fund, and Heidi leaves, humiliated. The two of them argue, with Evan slipping up and admitting that he sees the Murphys as his family. Alana, fed up with his disregard for the Connor Project, calls him out and points out some pretty major holes in his story. Evan asks Jared for help writing more emails, but he laughs at his desperation. Evan snaps at him, pointing out that Jared's reason for hanging out with him is its own lie. He just doesn't have any other friends.
Fuck you, Evan! Asshole!
Having severed most of the important relationships in his life, Evan is confronted with their overwhelming anger and tells himself that he's going to shut it all down and tell the truth. Imaginary Connor reappears, though, and forces him to face a bigger lie than the web he's tangled in now. The lie he told himself that led to this whole mess, the story, his connection with Connor, his need to right the wrongs around his death. The fall he took from that tree was no accident. He let go. Faced with the idea that he'd be forced back into that place if he dropped the Connor Project, he reaches out to Alana. She accuses him of faking the emails, and in a desperate move, he sends her the apparent suicide note. Deciding that this is the last push the project needs, she publishes it, and the fallout is disastrous. Though they reach their Kickstarter goal, the once supportive community turns on the Murphys. They sit around Zoe's laptop at the kitchen table and once again argue over Connor. Tensions escalate, and finally, Evan breaks and tells the truth. Dismayed and heartbroken, the Murphys run out, leaving him once again on an empty stage. He sings out to the audience, the full force of what he's done and his own feelings of helplessness, worthlessness, hitting him full force. At home, Heidi sits on the couch, reading the note on her laptop. She knows that Evan must have written it, and when he comes home she tells him that she didn't realize just how badly he was hurting. He sits beside her and she reminisces about the day his father left, how helpless she felt, how worried she was that she would fail Evan, but the one thing that she can promise him is that she'll always be there, and that in time, everything happening now will feel small. We transition to a year later, and the sound of sniffles can be heard throughout the audience as the orchard rises from the stage and we see Zoe sitting alone on a bench. Evan walks in and they catch up. He tells her that he's taking a year off to work and save up for college, and she tells him that the family comes to the orchard all the time, that they find solace in it somehow. He tells her that they didn't need to keep his lie a secret, but she says it was too important for too many people, that everyone needed it for something. She leaves and he looks out to the trees, writing one final letter.
Dear Evan Hansen, today is going to be a good day, and here's why. Because today, at least no matter what else, you are you. So, no hiding, no lying, just you, and that's enough.
All we see is sky for forever. We let the world pass by for forever.
Maybe someday everything that happens, maybe it'll all feel like a distant memory. Maybe someday no one will remember about the Connor Project, or me. But maybe someday another kid will be standing here, staring out at the trees, just feeling so alone. Wondering if the world might look different from all the way up there, just better. And maybe he'll start climbing one ridge at a time, and he'll keep going. Even when it seems like he can't find another foothold, even when it feels hopeless, like everything is telling him to just let go. This time. Well, maybe this time he won't let go. He'll just hold on. And keep going. He'll keep going till he sees the sun.
All we see is
obviously, I've had to condense a few things. There's only so much you can say in a YouTube video versus a 2.5-hour musical, but essentially, this is a show about three things. Mental health issues, the kind of separation between people, and especially young people and their parents in the modern age, and the way that these things are exacerbated by and oftentimes kind of caused by the internet. And with regard to the upcoming film's ability to cover all of these themes with nuance, and kind of retain its emotional impact, even before any trailer or clip or anything, there are already 5 pretty major red flags that I've noticed. I absolutely almost just spilled on this shirt. I'm a mess. Red flag number 1, the film rating system. So here's the thing. Adaptations always include compromise. That's a completely normal part of the whole thing. That's just what's to be expected. And sometimes the compromises you have to make in adapting a work of art, or, just cats, those compromises leave you kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And Dear Evan Hansen is accessible to just about any age group except for young kids, but the kind of core demographic is clearly teenagers and their parents. And that is the group I believe that needs to see the show the most, that really needs the messages in it, that need to hear all of it, that need to take part in the conversations that it opens up. But Broadway is lucky enough to kind of work without a standardized rating system. You just kind of when you're ordering tickets, it'll say oh, is the show, appropriate for young children or whatever, and sometimes it's not even that. But movies aren't quite that lucky. Because of that, some of the boundaries that Dear Evan Hansen, the musical, is able to push are not really acceptable for a PG-13 rating. A lot of the language, a lot of the discussions, a lot of the material that is covered in this show is likely to earn itself an R rating if adapted directly, and that leaves the issue of separating the target audience from the movie. A movie that really needs to be seen by teenagers being given an R rating, maybe not the best idea. Maybe not, particularly wise. Because it's not a Hamilton on Disney Plus situation where censoring a few words does the trick without hurting the source material. This is more like that controversy back when The Hunger Games came out, when the movie about child murder earned itself a PG-13, while an anti-bullying documentary had an R slapped onto it, cursing it to a life of obscurity. And my hair gets worse every time I change clothes, so that's something. Red flag number 2 I'm gonna keep pretty brief because I don't really like personally attacking anybody. That's not my vibe. That's not what I like to do. But I feel it is important to point out that the guy directing this movie is the same person who adapted Rent and who wrote the live-action Beauty and the Beast movie, which are 2 adaptations that are kind of infamous for ripping any and all nuance out of the original source material.
Teaching another girl to read isn't one enough.
And the latter was a Disney movie designed for kids to understand. And so with a story like this, that is of some concern. Red flag number 3, the casting. To be brutally honest, most of this is going to be about Ben Platt. I don't really like personally attacking anybody. That's not my vibe. That's not what I like to do. The original Evan Hansen, who took home a Tony for his performance, at first glance seems like the obvious choice to fill the role. So obvious, in fact, that they rushed the film's production in a way I have never seen before to get him into it. Only problem is, he originated the role 5 years ago, and he looked a little too old for the part back then. Can you tell I'm trying not to put these glasses on because it shows off the shine of the ring light that I have? The things you do for the bit. On stage in Dear Evan Hansen, there's that kind of suspension of disbelief that you get in a Broadway theater where, between the distance between yourself and the person standing on stage, where there's no extreme close-ups the way a movie has, there also is just kind of, there's already an element of things not being quite real on Broadway, so you're kind of going into it with a different logic. On screen now, however, I think it's going to be real easy to forget that this is a teenager, and that is a major problem for a lot of reasons. Amy Lovett, who's a theater YouTuber, she kind of explained it better than I ever could, so insert a clip of her thoughts right there.
Seeing somebody who looks 30 in the position of lying to this grieving family comes across as manipulative, whereas seeing somebody who looks 17 do that looks like a mistake.
And it's true, Evan Hansen is a character who makes a lot of mistakes, so many that you couldn't really be blamed for disliking him. A lot of people wish he had gotten more of a comeuppance, feel like he was let off a little too easy by the plot. But he is also a child. He's a teenager. He's a kid who is making all of the worst mistakes because he's not quite mature enough to grasp the gravity of the situation until it is too late to back out of it. And if the guy playing that part was playing a college student back in 2012, I want to say it was, you're just not going to be able to pull that off. The kind of morally gray nature of all the characters in the show, but especially the teenagers, is one that, like, the internet in its current state of, like, super black and white discourse, they don't have that critical thinking. It ain't there, Chief.
I don't really like personally attacking anybody.
And if you lean too far in one direction or the other, make Evan too sympathetic and pitiful, or too much of an asshole who's taking advantage of a family whose kid just died, your movie's gonna send all the wrong messages to all the wrong people. I did say this was going to be about more than just Ben Platt, so let's go into Connor's dad, Larry. Around the time that this movie was being cast, there was a lot of backlash around the show's kind of lack of racial inclusivity. Kind of blatantly in response to that, they were like, oh yeah, we're going to make the movie more diverse, which is a great thing in theory. And that is where they cast Danny Pino in the role of Larry. And that alone is far from an issue. I think he is an excellent actor. His role in Brain Dead was great. That whole show is great. More people need to see Brain Dead and need to know about it. It's on Amazon Prime. Please watch it. It's so good. The issue is that they felt in order to justify Larry not being white, they had to rewrite the role to make him the kid's stepfather instead of their biological father. You know, the problem there is kind of obvious, I feel like, because it takes this complicated, nuanced relationship between a father and a son who are struggling to connect with each other and turns it into that, like, stereotype, oh, you're not my real dad, whatever. Immediately, the dynamic in the show is just killed right there, and it's perpetuating the stereotype. And the idea that a step-parent can't fill the role of a biological parent and can't connect to their stepchild, which is not a great look. I keep looking at the image of me in the phone instead of at the actual camera. I feel like I'm on a Zoom meeting. We're in too deep. There's no going back now. With regard to a lot of the backlash about Dear Evan Hansen and its kind of race issues, there's a lot of other things at play that I'm not going to discuss because I don't want to drag up, you know, cast members' social media posts and their Instagram stories and whatever. You can look into it on your own. It's a whole other bag of worms of just not great. Not great at all. But yeah, I'm just going to kind of leave that section there. So, yeah. Wait, also, Julianne Moore and Amy Adams should have switched roles. They would have made so much more sense in the opposite. Okay, now I'm done. Red flag number 4. Film. Just film itself. Throughout the Broadway show, entire conversations are had with characters just like standing, facing outwards at the audience, and that is meant to convey that they're speaking over social media, whether it be texting, video call, whatever. Like, every time that happens, it is in some way indicating that they are talking on the internet. And I just have to ask, have you ever seen that done well in film? Then you've got the projections that take over the stage at various points in the show, and those are filled with Facebook posts, work emails, tweets, Discord chats probably at this point, Twitter drama. Obviously theater is live, the sky is blue, grass is green, but there are some shows that kind of being live is coincidental. It doesn't necessitate the way that the story is told, and therefore it can kind of more easily be adapted onto film. But Dear Evan Hansen was created so specifically for the stage that they're kind of inextricable from each other. You can't do half of what Dear Evan Hansen requires you to do if it is not a live performance. Beyond the visualization of the internet, the more introspective or metaphorical moments of the show, if adapted directly, are gonna look, it's gonna be hard to pull off. Having Connor show up to talk to Evan on stage plays into kind of a look into Evan's head. Connor even acknowledges it at one point, that he's standing there talking to himself. And nobody's surprised by that, nobody in the audience thinks, oh, Evan's hallucinating Connor. Oh, this is Connor's ghost. It's like, no, this is Evan talking to himself in a theater way. We are seeing his thought process. On film, where what you see on screen tends to skew a lot more literal, you're gonna think that he's a ghost or that Evan's hallucinating. And God, talk about changing the story. Similarly, the musical numbers, they're not gonna play well. Most of the songs in the show, with maybe like a couple of exceptions, are kind of just a character or multiple characters standing on the stage, projections happening usually, and they're singing about their feelings. And because that is a thing that is normal in theater, nobody is bothered by it, nobody is bored by it. It's like a soliloquy. But in a movie,
Bring him home.
more important than any of these things, in my opinion, though, is the idea of loneliness. Because that is a major theme of this show, loneliness and isolation, in spite of how wildly connected the world supposedly is right now with the internet and all of that. And I firmly believe that no medium can convey loneliness or isolation quite in the way that the stage can. It doesn't matter what camera tricks you use, or what beautiful orchestral music is playing in the background, or what Oscar-winning performance is being given in the center of the screen. Nothing will quite convey loneliness like an actor standing alone on an empty stage. I firmly believe that, and I don't think anything's going to change my mind. In Evan's lowest moments, when we need to feel for him the most, those are the moments he needs to be the most isolated, the most alone. And there needs to be a distinct visual contrast between those scenes and the ones where the stage is full of projections and there are people and it's chaotic and emotional and powerful. And I sound like a broken record, but once again, that's another thing that's going to be lost in this adaptation. Red flag number 5. 13 Reasons Why. Up until this point, I've been kind of speaking as a fan who's afraid that her favorite show is going to lose its artistic integrity. That's not what this section is going to be about, because I've kind of been blatantly overlooking a really important point, and it's one that I think a lot of criticism has been overlooking when it comes to talking about this movie, and I feel like it's something that needs to be discussed. See, the nuance and emotionality that I keep talking about kind of impersonally is what's needed to get the message of the show to its audience. That your loved ones are going to screw up and so will you, but you'll love each other anyway. That the internet is not a thing you should mess with to escape your own struggles and mental health issues, and it is not a place to find a community in place of actual mental health care. That going off your meds without telling anyone is a terrible, terrible idea. And most importantly, obviously, that suicide is never the answer. In the theater, when given the time to take this whole story in, you're surrounded by people who are having this experience with you, who are feeling the same way, who are crying, who are hugging their family members. There's a solidarity in that room. You know, there's a feeling that you are not alone. The impact that that leaves makes those messages very clear. The right way. If some of that nuance is stripped away, if Connor's suicide or Evan's mistakes are accidentally glamorized a little too much, if some teenager is hurting and watching this on their living room couch alone, I have some serious worries about what might come of that. When Netflix's 13 Reasons Why hit the air, it was similarly an adaptation of a work that was intended for suicide prevention. But when presented with the show itself as it was,
he told me that your daughter's death was, we believe, was suicide, and it was staged based off of a show, 13 Reasons Why, and I'm like, what is that?
Some families are blaming the suicides of two teenage girls on a popular Netflix series.
From the moment 13 Reasons Why debuted on Netflix in 2017, mental health professionals were alarmed, worried the show, which centers around a girl's suicide, would lead to copycats. Now, new published research says teen suicide spiked in the month after the show's release, a 28.9% increase among American kids ages 10 to 17, a 19-year high. And over the rest of the year, the study estimates there were 195 more suicides than would have been expected based on trends.
I know a lot of people who credit Dear Evan Hansen, the musical, with getting them out of a really dark time in their lives, with convincing them, at the risk of sounding corny, to not let go. And when they announced that it would be adapted to film, I was excited because I've always said that this is a story that needs to be shared with more people. Theater has always had an accessibility issue. Not everybody can get to Broadway or to London or to see a show on tour. But the more that's come out about this movie, the more I worry that rather than helping more people by sharing this thing that I love, that has done so much for me and for people that I care about, by rushing this thing out just so that Ben Platt wouldn't age out of the movie, it might be causing more harm than good. So what would I do? Because I don't want to end on that note. This movie is going to happen. It's coming out this year. But if it were me, I would suggest also, on top of it, or prior to, once we're safe to go into movie theaters again, releasing the professionally shot version of the Broadway show. That is something that's been done many times before, releasing for a weekend or two these pro shots that I know one already exists into the public sphere, where you can go with your family into the theater. I believe you don't have to deal with the ratings system because it's its own thing. It's considered an event. And you'll have that kind of same experience of being surrounded by people, of having that same solidarity, and kind of getting a clearer image of the point of this show. But, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I don't mean to end it on that note. Maybe I'll put a blooper reel at the end to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. Or I could just play this again.